Here at Physio Matters, we think physio matters. Join as a premium member now and access over 500 videos, get free tickets to shows and upgrades included. Access at home, work or on a unicycle to take your knowledge to the moon. physio-matters.com, more content than you can fit into a gym.
Hello and welcome to session 29 of YouMatter. Hello and welcome to the next session of YouMatter, where I'll be talking to Celia Champion, Director of Painless Practice. We are having a conversation in this episode around conflict, a subject probably not that dear to many of your hearts. As clinicians, as human beings, I will openly admit that it in the past has been one of my least favourite scenarios, topics, but it's something I have learned to become a little bit more comfortable with and something that I support other people to become more comfortable with, as does Celia. You will hear in this episode lots and lots of references to things you can read, things you can watch, tips you can employ. Celia is a wealth of knowledge on these things. I think there'll be lots of aha moments, perhaps some cringe moments, but you're going to take away a lot of useful information if conflict is something that you would like to become a little bit more comfortable with, if not love. So sit back, enjoy the episode, and I'll be back at the end with some information about an ongoing workshop following on from the conversations I've had recently with Celia around. So hello and welcome to this latest edition of YouMatter, where I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome Celia Champion, who for many of you won't need any introduction. I'm sure you've come across Celia and her amazing work before, but if by any chance you haven't, Celia is the director of a wonderful business called Painless Practice, which supports clinic owners on the business side of practice. So Celia's mission is to make sure that clinic owners are as confident in the business side of things as they are in their clinical work. And there are kind of four pillars to what Painless Practice offers. They can support you with growing your practice, establishing a better work-life balance. Celia, I've written team something and then I can't read my own writing.
So team management and leadership and, just kind of really working really, really well with your team and being a really great leader.
Good. Team. And then the last thing I can read is your exit strategy. So those are the kind of four pillars of Painless Practice. And I would really encourage you to go and look at Celia's website if you haven't before. We'll give you some links and things at the end, but go and have a look around because Celia really does understand clinicians. She's been working with clinicians, specialising in working with clinicians for years, and she really does get it. So Celia and I haven't said hello, welcome Celia. Let's do that.
Well, thank you, Jo. Nice to see you.
Thank you for agreeing to do this episode with me on conflict. Celia and I have actually been chatting together about conflict on and off for the last few months. And I delivered a webinar to Celia's community recently on conflict and surviving the feelings, which tapped in quite well to my side of things. And we were laughing when we were talking about what was going to be involved in this episode. Celia had the lovely phrase of basically helping you get your big girl or big boy pants on when you need to. So that is tongue in cheek, but essentially that's what we're going to talk about, the nitty gritty of conducting conflict. But there's all sorts of stuff around that. So Celia, where I would like to start, if it's okay with you, would seem like a simple question, but I think it's really relevant to clinicians. Why conflict? Why do we have to have conflict, particularly when so many of us would rather it just didn't exist?
We'd rather it didn't exist, but we're all human beings and it does exist. I think I said to you earlier, I think, the worst problem about communication is the illusion that it's taken place. So I think you might think that you've communicated something very clearly, but it hasn't been heard in the same way that you've communicated. Your intention of communication hasn't been actually heard in the same way. So I think that's where we start, is that actually conflict is going to be inevitable because we're never going to communicate 100% perfectly. we can't control what the other person hears or understands or feels in terms of how we conduct ourselves. So I think, in a nutshell, that's where it starts.
Yeah, and it makes a lot of sense. So let me just clarify. Are you saying in that well, I hear that you're saying that conflict can happen as a result of poor communication. Are you also saying that if we actually look at our communication first, then perhaps we can save ourselves from some conflict situations?
I 100% think that there probably are things that we can do to save ourselves. I mean, I think it's a learning process, and we learn every day how, our communication is landing or not landing. Sometimes we surprise ourselves where something has gone smoother than we thought, or we're shocked that someone's reacted the way they have when we've seemingly put it across in a very kind of what we thought was a calm, level-headed, kind way. So I think I kind of think we're always going to have to deal with conflict. I think there are lots of different tools and things that we'll talk about today that you can use to really help you communicate better. I don't think we'll ever get rid of it unless, as you say, just kind of hide away and pretend nothing's ever happened and we just never ever have any conflict in our life ever. Probably make one quite miserable.
Yeah. Often the putting off just delays the inevitable and in fact exacerbates the inevitable.
Oh yes, gets worse. Absolutely. You kind of think, I'll just leave it. I'll just push it under the carpet, and eventually you get to a stage where you just go, and
and even as someone who supports people with conflict scenarios and offers templates and support and things like that, hand on heart, I would still personally rather have a day where there's no conflict than a day where there is. And I suspect, well, of course, that's not peculiar to clinicians, but do you think clinicians in particular have a problem with conflict more than other?
I think, generally speaking, the very nature of clinicians, the kind of that really warm, caring, most clinicians, if there's a kind of a book called Surrounded by Idiots, and I'll tell you a bit more about that in a while, but there are 4 different personalities, and this is what the book kind of puts out, and obviously you can have a bit of each color in you, but I'd say a large majority of clinicians are kind of sitting in the earth green, calm, kind of caring space, because you've become clinicians. You want to help people get better and improve their lives, and so a lot of that, I think, just by nature of personality, can make it harder to deal with conflict.
Yeah, and certainly I would say the feelings around conflict. You're absolutely right. That earth green thing just even sounds appealing to me, sort of visually, and things that I feel comfortable with. Yes, earth and green clinician, absolutely. And I think sometimes conflict almost seems to directly insult what we've decided to be in our lives and how we want to represent ourselves. It's almost like these events happen which I don't know, feel like they cause us to present a different part of ourselves which we're not comfortable with to the world. What do the other colours represent in that system?
So interesting that the book was written by Thomas Erickson, and he's a consultant, and went into this organization, and the kind of CEO of the organization was, I don't know what you're going to do about this lot, because I'm just surrounded by idiots. And the whole thing that came out was, actually, you're not surrounded by idiots, you're surrounded by different personalities. And so they're kind of 4 key personalities. And interestingly, they say that their research, and I think you can use all sorts of different models and, lean on things. And, it's not, this is not a 100% scientific. However, their research suggests that 5% are dominated by one color only. 15% can be described in a 3-color range. And then the majority of people the 80% are dominated by 2. So your 4 kind of key colors are the fiery red. So the person that's really bold and assertive. And then you've got the sunshine yellow, the kind of outgoing, cheerful. You've got the cool blue, which is the really formal and precise. And then you've got earth green, which is that calm and tranquil. And so you can imagine if you're kind of a combination of colors, or you're dominated by one particular color, and you're dealing with someone that's a different color from you, you can, conflict might arise just by the nature of your style of communication and their style of communication. And I think this is a really great platform to just kind of play around with and kind of think about who around you, what colors are the people around you, and so what do they need, and also just recognizing, I was like, my fiance is a definite blue and green, and I'm a definite red and yellow, so we're all four colors all together. But I know where his indecisiveness comes from. So if we're going shopping, and we went shopping looking for a suit the other day for him, and that it's because he's green, and greens are indecisive. They find it difficult to make decisions. And so I can recognize that, and we have a bit of a laugh about it as well. I say, oh my gosh, Chris, you're being so green. But it's like, otherwise, that could have been, I could have got really irritated that it's taken us 3 hours, and we've gone back to the exact first one that was the right one. But just recognizing those kind of differences in personality gives you a better way of communicating. I can kind of just jokingly kind of nudge him along, rather than get like huffy puffy, fiery red and come on, this is ridiculous, which I could do as well because I'm red.
Yeah, so understanding yourself is as important as the person that you're
exactly. Yeah.
I was smiling when you were saying it, because it reminded me of a conversation I had with our Chinese acupuncturist years ago. Through Chinese acupuncture, her references were still, they weren't colours, they were earth, water, metal and fire. And she actually said, then almost all of you here are earth. And she said, you've got a bit of Jeremy Paxman in you as well, Jo, which I assume is maybe a little tiny accent of red, perhaps.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can see how it's understandable that so few people would be purely one colour.
And it's just, when James and I, so my business partner that I had, who's retired in 2020, when James and I kind of came across these colours, we recognised, he's red and blue, and I'm red and yellow, and our blue and the yellow are kind of the diagonal opposites clash the most. So the cool blue and the yellow really clash, and so we realized that. So I realized that he needs those details and that facts and the data, and me being yellow is just like, that's completely out of my kind of my even zone. But my yellow could also kind of me going in and being huggy and, very boisterous and loud and cheerful, and could kind of like wind him up a bit. So, we could recognize that actually, how do we work best together in terms of our different personalities and our different needs? Yeah.
And also as business partners, and I recognize this with me and my business partner here, definitely, because I'm sure whichever system you use, I'm sure you and James probably found the same, but Matt and I have got into a habit of, when there's a conflict situation, we actually discuss which of us is going to be better according to the person that needs to take place with, and we can make the decision in an instant now. Definitely a Joe situation, or that's a Matt situation. Yeah, it's really helpful. But the book was called Surrounded by Idiots.
Yes,
make sure
Thomas
that
Erickson.
Thomas Erickson. Lovely. So Celia, if we then acknowledge that with the best one in the world and the best communication in the world, conflict situations are going to occur, not just because we're the business owner. Sometimes the other way, you might just bring things up with your boss. Do you use any sort of formal templates, or what do you use to support people if they come to you and say they're just not comfortable with conflict? So if we think about a situation where, let's say you've got a practitioner that's underperforming, and this is going to obviously cause a conflict, my first go-to is to work out what level are we at in terms of not meeting expectation. And it's a very simple four-step model. Number one is, do they know what the expectations are? And we kind of need to make sure to answer that question really, really truthfully. Do they, do they have a job description? Have you sat and put goals together, and they know that they need to be achieving, let's say, a certain patient visit average, or a certain occupancy in their diary, or
even just they need to give you 2 blogs a month or whatever it is, do they know what that expectation is? Then if we can 100% tick that and say, yes, absolutely they do, then we want to go down to the next level and say, do they know that they're not meeting those expectations? So have you actually kept them updated, and you haven't just set the goals and then a year down the line, you haven't let the poor person know that they haven't met the goals. So we need to really make sure, like, do they actually know that their patient visit average is 1.3 and you're expecting it to be 4, or that their occupancy is actually 60%, whereas they feel quite busy because their diary is a bit bitty, but no one's actually given them that feedback. So do you have regular conversations with your team members about how they're getting on? If you can 100% tick that, absolutely yes, they absolutely know what's expected, they absolutely know that they haven't met your expectations. The next question is, can they meet your expectations? And so are they actually able to? Do you need to give them some training? Do they need a bit more support? What resources might they need for them to be able to meet that expectation? And if we can 100% tick and say, I've looked in the mirror and I've done absolutely everything in my power to be able to help this person meet my expectations, we then go down to the next question is, will they meet your expectations? And that's where maybe they are making a choice to, I'm not doing what you're saying. I'll block up my diary first on Monday morning as much as I like, or whatever. And if they won't meet your expectations, my expression is, you invite them to go and express their talents elsewhere.
Okay.
But we almost shouldn't get down to that. If we do get down to that level, then as long as you've done absolutely everything, probably they're not going to be happy where they are. You're unhappy, they're probably unhappy, and the best resolution would be to part ways.
Yeah,
there's a lot that can happen prior to that.
Yes, I hear that, and particularly in the gap between third or fourth and fifth stages. So when you have maybe spent some time going back and perhaps reiterating expectations, discussing with them how they might go about making sure that happens, and then some kind of review process, sort of HR language now. But, it sounds very quick, like from the penultimate stage to the last one. But I hear you, there's a lot of space there for reiteration and review, giving people the opportunity. But I really like those steps in that, if someone is averse to conflict, then it starts very much with a discussion, doesn't it?
And I think I know we've probably spoken about the kind of purpose and values and vision, and that can be a little bit of a kind of tick box exercise, which I would hope it isn't, but unfortunately often it is just kind of come up with purpose and come up with values and stick them on your website and stick them up on the practice wall and whatever. But I really truly have seen such great positive impact when those are actually real and they actually are meaningful, and you've really come up with what is a purpose, so I think there's 2 whys in running a practice. There's a why for what is a clinician trying to get out of it. So yes, there must be in terms of making a living and meeting your personal goals, like you're building a business and that business needs to support your journey and your personal goals. So there is that vision. But I think the bigger purpose is, why does it open in the morning, and why should anyone care? And it's like that kind of, because you're getting people better, because you're wanting to get them better, keep them well, you want to help them improve their quality of life. And I think when you've really articulated that, and I know a lot of people think, we've got that, and as soon as I sit down and say, okay, right, let's articulate that, it's actually quite hard. It's quite hard coming up with something that you feel really genuinely passionate about. It doesn't feel cringy. So I think that's almost like the first building block that needs to be in place, is what is that purpose? And then what are the top 3 things that are non-negotiable in the way you deliver your patient journey, but also the way that you work together as a team. Mm-hmm. And if you get those really articulated really, really well and defined. So maybe you want to be educational. And so maybe your definition of that is that we provide our patients with additional resources. We go over and above, and we, go out of our way to find extra stuff for our patients, or you're providing a very personalized service. We're making sure that we're really understanding the patient's goals and how what they have presented with, how that impacts them and how they want to be different, and defining what those values are and defining what that purpose is. If your whole team are completely on board and you're actually living that purpose and values, then when it comes to having difficult conversations, it's about the values. 99% of the time, whatever is happening that is causing this conflict is probably one of the values that is just not being upheld. So you could so then it becomes about talking about the value. And if you've done a lot of work with a team around that, it makes those conversations so much easier, because come on, we've agreed that we really want to personalize the service. And, we've just kind of done, if you've done a notes audit or whatever, and you see that everybody's just like kind of like sausage factory, then we can have that conversation.
I'm going to go down a bit of an alley consciously, because I think it's really important. It's slightly away from conflict, but you and I have talked about values before, and I've shared with you that sometimes I find the way values are elicited, and I completely agree with you that with that just sticking random good sounding things on a wall and never reference doesn't work. And the other thing that I've found as a director of quite a large company is how difficult it is to get sort of a small number of cohesive values that literally everybody can buy into, without it getting really bland, and without it ending up being things which, quite frankly, any decent practice should be exhibiting, like friendliness and integrity and things like that. And it was going through my mind while you were talking, and I'm just wondering, particularly as we're talking about individualism to an extent in relation to conflict, what are your thoughts on having sort of big headline clinic values? You mentioned 2 or 3 there, so that everyone remembers them and everyone can try and live by them or agree to live by them. But then, almost on the basis of this colour system that you talked about, I can sort of see the value in then allowing, maybe even in the course of these conflict discussions, allowing people to talk about their own personal values, which are really because of the peculiarities of that person and the good peculiarities of that. So, and they might come up and the person might say, well, yes, actually, I do know that this is the clinic value, but because of this particular value that I have, we need to try and interpret that differently.
100%. I actually just was chatting to a client yesterday, and I'm going over to their clinic in September, and we are actually doing a dream session where we just kind of work really understanding what does everybody want to achieve in their life. So it's based on, Matthew Kelly does this very short clip about doing a dream session, and every year he gets his whole team to come, and they have to come with their 100 dreams, and everybody moans and says, 100 dreams, I can't come up with 100 dreams. But then as people are talking about their dreams, one person's saying, I want to take my wife to Italy, and I also want to take my wife to Italy, that's number 17 now. And they're kind of like just talking about doing this dream session. So we're going to kind of really do that and just get to know each other more personally, which will lead us to a different model in a while. But the other thing that we're going to talk about is, what does each individual need? What are their needs in the workplace environment? Like, how do they need to be interacting with each other? What are their values? What are their kind of needs? So yes, we've got the overall arching clinic values that everybody's on board with, and that we interview against. You bring people on board that are in alignment with those. But now it is that next level down. It's like, okay, so this is what we're all working towards, but how can we make it just that bit much better for you individually?
Really nuanced leadership, isn't it? Not just using the same approach for everybody.
Yeah,
I'm reminded I did a sort of project recently on MeHub, my Facebook community, particularly called it the quiet clinician, for more introverted clinicians, and it was an eye-opener for me again on how we conduct things like in the clinic, things like eliciting ideas. So, I would credit myself with being able to make most people feel quite comfortable.
Mhm.
And I sort of thought, well, that's fine. As long as I can make everybody feel comfortable in a meeting, then everyone's going to come up with ideas, and that'll be wonderful. And talking to the quieter clinicians who that work that I was doing appealed to, just realised, however comfortable they are, they're just not in a group going to throw forward their baby of an idea that they're not quite sure about and don't know how it's going to be received. And I spoke to a couple of the quieter members of my team, and they were like, "Yeah, absolutely, I'm never going to do that. Come be in the staff room, ask me to write you an email, give me a week to think about it. Just give me a different approach that works for me."
Yeah, and that's that kind of green, calm, tranquil, indecisive. Don't put a spotlight on them, and it is exactly, it's just really getting to know people's, how they tick, what they need, and how you can best provide that.
Yes. So making sure I don't go completely away from confidence. But if we stay with that idea of individualism, before we pressed record, you were talking about this surrounded by idiots and colour categorising. And you talked just now about different approaches with different people. So in an actual conflict situation, would you mind going through some of the colours and maybe giving some thoughts as to how you approach, if you're the one needing to steer the situation?
Yeah. So, I mean, very kind of basically with the fiery red, you've just got to be bold and direct and get straight to the point. Don't dilly-dally, because they will just walk all over you and you'll walk away from that conversation not having achieved everything. So with them, you just need to really, really be direct. This is what's happened. This is what I expect. And this is what I would like to do to fill the gap. You could have it on a more obviously collaborative conversation, but you need to probably have a really, really, and a PEG framework is perfect. So PEG is PEG, problem, expectation, gap. And go through that with a red person and be done with it and move on to the next thing, because the reds just needs that.
So the gap, so the amount of time that you're going to allow before.
Well, PEG as in, this is a problem that we've got, this is my expectation, and this is a gap between my problem and my expectation. So, and then you can go on to resolution.
Right.
The blue, get your facts straight. Don't be going in and saying, oh, I feel like you're not really retaining new patients. Have the numbers, have the proof, with blue people, you just need to be very, very factual and precise and have that data there for them. Sunshine yellow, it is that kind of really, they want that rapport, they want that being comfortable in a meeting. So top and tail it. So James and I found that quite funny as well with the two of us, because he's kind of, I'm not saying he's boring or not sociable or anything, but he's not the sunshine yellow that I am. He's blue, wants to just get on with it. And, this is where we're at. And so often with his emails, he'd send an email. So combination of red and blue, send an email saying, Celia, boom. And I think, oh my gosh, like, why is he cross with me? Have I done something that's offended him? And I'd, like, my yellow would be overthinking this. And so he knew top and tail the emails. But I also knew if he sends an email like that, he probably just needs something and just send it to him. So the yellows, we want to be kind of, friendly. But with the yellows, we want to make sure that we are following up with an email, because yellows, you'll have a meeting with a yellow. The yellow will, yeah, I know, I realize that's going wrong. And what I'm going to do is I can do this and I can do that. And they'll promise the world. Mm-hmm. And 2 weeks later, nothing else has changed. So with a yellow, we really need to be following up with them. Mm-hmm. And then with the green, we need to help them make that decision. So we almost need to kind of pull them along and help them come up with a decision in the meeting, because otherwise they are very, very indecisive. But we need, they're very kind, they're very reliable, they're very team orientated. So with them, it's just kind of being a gentle, like if you're a red, don't go in all, kind of lights glazing, bulls glazing, or whatever that saying is. You need to calm it down, and probably, even just your tone of voice and if it's a yellow person, you can probably be a little bit more energetic and upbeat. Right, let's sort this out, let's get this done. Whereas with a green, we just want to be that kind of bit calmer approach.
That sounds great. And it feeds into some of the work I do with people, because I'm just thinking as you were talking then about how useful it would be to be able to know what colour all your team were, and then before you go into the situation, particularly if they're a different colour to you, to have a process to almost get yourself a little bit into their state before you go into the session.
Yeah, and with a green,
no, go on.
With a green, we really need to remember that no spotlight, and it does need to be a one-to-one. You'd probably get away with a yellow kind of doing it kind of in the corridor or whatever. But with a green person, you absolutely need to make sure that you're doing it as a one-to-one and you're organized, because they're very indecisive.
Yeah, and the blues with the detail. Yeah, and it's interesting because I always, before we had that particular conversation, I was going to talk to you about a tendency I've noticed, which some people might relate to, in that because I don't love conflict, certainly in the past, my tendency was to get in and get out as quickly as possible, mainly so that I didn't have to handle my own feelings for too long. Now I hear what you're saying, that possibly with a red person, as long as you're decisive, that could be a good approach. Yeah. But with your greens and your yellows, it's probably helpful to slow it down. And I'll see with your blues, maybe not so much time in the meeting, but certainly time to prepare beforehand and make stuff. Yeah. So time, giving the situation the right amount of time, even if it's not actual conflicts. Yeah, it's really important, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah. Oh, there's so many useful things here. One of the feelings I think that's really strong with conflict is guilt, and in my experience, I would say it generally kicks in after the event. So people might have had really good coaching and be really clear on how they're going to conduct a conflict situation, or maybe not. They may have prepared themselves very well. And if those things are in place, I would say a good sign that you've followed a good process is that the guilt is less. But you are the best one in the world. I think guilt is a feeling that we're often left with, particularly if we're quite reflective. Anyone might be really happy with what's gone on during the conflict situation, and then the voices start afterwards. Oh, I was this, I was that, I should have said that. They probably now hate me for this. What are your thoughts around that?
I mean, I think it's good practice to reflect on what went well, what maybe you could have done differently. If you were in a situation next time, how would you handle it differently? And I think one needs to, just recognize that there are going to be situations that maybe didn't go 100% correctly. And sometimes it might even be appropriate to, at a later stage, have a conversation with the person that you had that conflict conversation with, and say, I've been thinking about this, and and sometimes it's just being honest and being vulnerable and saying, I've been really concerned about the conversation that we had, even though we got to the stage. I just want to check in. How are you? Are you okay? Like, be human. If that always, there's two rules about kindness. Number one, always be kind. And that doesn't mean avoiding conflict. Sometimes it is kind to have conflict. In fact, a lot of the time it is kind to have conflict. But number one, in the two rules of kindness, is always be kind. And number two, if you can't if you can't be kind, refer back to rule number one.
Yes, excellent.
And I'd say it's also recognizing that you need to be kind to yourself as well.
Yeah.
So sometimes that conflict might feel unkind, but it's kind to you. And then you've just got to work out, how do I make it kind to the other person?
And this leads us beautifully into the concept you introduced me to called radical candour. I've done a little bit of reading around it.
Okay.
You told me about it, but Celia, would you explain your understanding of radical candour?
Yeah, so another really great book to read. Kim Scott wrote this book, and she talks about how we need to challenge directly but care personally, and she really comes up with this that actually, and if you really care personally and you challenge directly, you are being radically candid. And she just talks about how often when we start our careers, or you kind of finish school and you'd finish your university and you're going to your first job, and people say, be professional. And that's almost like stop caring and be professional.
Be a robot.
Be a robot. And just, now you're in work, you're in work environment, you have to be professional, and you shouldn't make versus manager, and all sorts of kind of things come in there. But she says that a lot of people will care personally, but they fear giving direct feedback. And actually, so she has this kind of quadrant, and there are 4 different ways that you can communicate. So the caring personally, but not giving direct feedback, which is where I think a lot of people might find themselves, especially in the caring, when you're a green caring person, is actually ruinous empathy. So whilst you're really caring for this person, you're not actually giving them the kindness of the feedback that they need to be able to progress in whichever area they're struggling in. And then the 2 kind of quadrants on the bottom, where you don't challenge directly and you don't care, you don't give a toss, is manipulative insincerity. You just kind of you give praise that's insincere, you maybe flatter a person that's insincere, maybe you criticizing them behind their back, you're just really being manipulatively insincere. And then the other not great area to be in is where you're challenging directly and you don't care. So with a manipulative insincerity, you don't even challenge them. You just talk about them behind their back, and you kind of giving them compliments that are insincere. Whereas this one, you're actually, you don't spare their feelings. You just tell them what they need to know, and you just kind of like a bull in a china shop.
I think she calls that one obnoxious aggression, isn't she?
Obnoxious aggression, yeah. So those 2 areas, really do not want to be in those. And unfortunately, a lot of people, and I've definitely been in that area before, that ruinous empathy, where you just care so much for the person, you're too frightened to give them feedback, you don't want them to leave. And I think that in today's environment of recruitment, I think even people that are quite good at being radically candid almost find themselves in the ruinous empathy, because they really care about the person, but they don't want to give them any negative feedback in case they say, oh, I'm going to jump ship. And then they're going to have to go and find someone else. And so, so really that the place that you want to be is in the radical candid place, where you really do care for that person, and you've got to genuinely show that you care for that person. But that you challenge directly. And she gives a great example in her book and in some of her talks that you can find on YouTube. And she says, a lot of people say, well, how long do these radically candid conversations need to take? And she gives an example, well, they can take 2 minutes. So she gives an example of she had a dog, she's just got this dog, and she was walking in the road and whatever, and she got to this traffic light, and the dog kind of jumped out, and she had to kind of pull the dog back, and almost a disaster, but it wasn't. Anyway, this gentleman next to her kind of said, you're going to kill, I can see you really love that dog, but you're going to kill it if you don't teach it how to sit. And then he goes, sit, and the dog sits. And she's like, I didn't even know the dog knew what sit meant. But she said in that very small interaction, he immediately said, I can see you care for that dog. And he immediately gave her direct feedback.
Yeah.
And
a solution.
And the solution, yeah. So, and it is hard. You've got to be able to get it as well. You've got to give permission for your team to give that radical candor feedback, and you've got to kind of learn to give it.
Mm. Yeah, no, I really like it, and I haven't read the book. I've seen quite a few of the YouTube videos, and I'd really encourage people to start with those, or read the book if you like as well. But it's a really nice concept, and the first time I heard the detailed description of particularly ruinous empathy and manipulative insincerity, massive cringe moments. And actually, I think they can lead into each other. I often work with archetypes of the victim, the martyr, and the bitch, which are find versions of that online as names like the victim, the persecutor, and the rescuer.
Yes.
But particularly rescuer slipping into persecutor, which in that quadrant would be the well, sometimes actually the ruinous empathy person, almost putting up with stuff for so long and too long that they will have to go into obnoxious aggressive because they kind of haven't done the stages in between, and they've got themselves so angry that it can only come out in this really uncontrolled and unhelpful way.
And I think that even if you care for the person, I think we were talking about earlier where, you know, we want to avoid conflict, so we just sweep it under the carpet, and then suddenly we just explode. And in that moment of explosion, you're not showing that you care personally for the person. So therefore, you're giving that direct feedback and saying, this isn't working, you're having whatever. That is that obnoxious aggression. But it's not that you don't care for the person, it's just that you haven't shown it in your communication. Essentially. And you just needed to put that personal care in to put it into the radical Candour quadrant.
Yeah, and I love it, Celia. You're really certainly helping me, and I'm sure people listening, to reframe the definition of yourself as a carer in that moment. It isn't always that reactive, what does this person need in this moment now? It's much far reaching. What is the bigger picture? How can I support this person in the future and my business as a whole, or the business as a whole?
And hopefully, you know, by having this conversation and just sharing kind of different tools and, you know, just insight as well, just even awareness of ourselves, hopefully that will reduce the number of times that we end up in that obnoxious aggression space.
Yes, absolutely. Or the manipulative one.
And I think that ruinous empathy, it's also, in a way, I mean, one of the examples that she shared was how, you know, she kind of came up with this ruinous empathy because of her one employee, Bob, who everybody loved Bob, but he wasn't doing his work and no one told him. And then when eventually it got to the point where, you know, she had to kind of bring him in and say, right, well, this isn't working. He was like, kind of, well, why didn't you tell me? Why did no one tell me? And there was probably even not a tiny bit of manipulative sincerity going on, although I wouldn't say it was that people didn't care about him, but I think the ruinous empathy can get a little bit more if you're giving that kind of, no, you're doing all right, when they're not.
Yeah.
So I think there's one ruinous empathy where you just don't give any feedback. So you're not being direct about it, but then there might be a tinge of you're sort of saying to the person they're doing well, but they're not actually.
Yeah, you're just kicking the can down the road with a nice comment.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, Celia, there's one more sort of change of gear that I'd like to make. And we've talked mostly at the moment about, or sort of from the behalf of the person effectively leading the complex situation. But I'm sure lots of people would agree that being the recipient of criticism, however nicely it's delivered, you know, let's hope the person giving it to you has listened to this podcast and is going to do it in a radically candid way. But it's still really hard, isn't it? And again, I think if you're a caring person, I can certainly relate to being in a situation where I was having to receive feedback and still trying to care for the person delivering it to me as well. It's quite a complex scenario.
Yeah. And I think something that comes to mind when you say that is managing our limbic responses. So when we are giving or receiving feedback, we are going to have a certain level of limbic response going on. So our brains are always working out if we're in a threat or reward state. And when we're getting, you know, if we're having a difficult conversation with someone and we're on the receiving side, our brains are telling us you're in danger. A guy by the name of David Rock created this model called SCARF. And he talks about how when we're in a threat or reward state, like a reward state, like we win the lotto, or in a threat state where a lion's chasing us, when we're in a threat state in a social environment, so not like being chased by a lion, but like just in a social environment where we're having a conversation and it's uncomfortable and we feel under threat, our brains respond in the same way. Our prefrontal cortex shuts down and our limbic response kicks in to protect us. And because our prefrontal cortex shuts down a bit, we're not in the same position to be able to respond, to be able to logically understand, to be able to hear. We go into a defensive mode. And so in order for us to have the best results from a conflict situation on both sides, we need to make sure that we're dampening those limbic responses. And he talks about the scarf model, which has got 5 different buttons, if you want to call them that can be pushed. So if we're in a situation where we feel our status is under threat, so the status is the S. So if we feel like we're let's say I'm a young physio that's just started working, and now my boss, who's been a physio for 20 years, is now having a difficult conversation with me because of my patient retention. If status is really important to me, that's massively going to push that button, and it's going to cause the limbic response. The next one is certainty. So we're going to work out, am I feeling, have I got any certainty? So if certainty is really important to someone, then we need to make sure that they know exactly what's going to happen, how the conversation is going to go. Then they might need to have certainty in terms of a very clear job description, very clear targets, whatever that means. Autonomy is if we have our sense of choice, if that's being threatened, that could push our button. And then relatedness, so going to the yellow person, relatedness is really important. So they're always working out, am I in a friend or foe situation? And then the fairness, is this a fair exchange? And so we need to just make sure, we need to know which one of those push our buttons. So if we're in a conflict situation, actually, if we realize that, status really pushes my buttons, or certainty, then we need to, almost just by naming it and recognizing it, we can calm ourselves down and we'll be more open. And then for the person, if we're having a conversation, if we're setting up a conversation that's going to be conflict, we need to make sure that we're dampening those as much as possible. And a few things like just asking permission. So asking the person, is now a good time? Is it a good time to talk now? Or are you comfortable sitting in my office, or shall we go for a walk down in the park? Or, asking them permission gives them more control, giving them a little bit more control of that situation. Or just giving placement, telling them, this is what I want to do. I want to talk about what's happening, and then I'd like to just hear your views about it, and then we're going to come up with a plan so that we can move forward. And you're just giving them that placement so that that's calming them down. Because it's like, so can I have a word in my office? What does that do? Boom, limbic response. Yeah. Terrified. Oh gosh, I'm in trouble. So we need, just being aware that from a receiver's point of view as to what triggers you, and therefore you can prepare yourself and you can calm yourself, and you can get whatever information you need prior to any meeting that you're going into. And then also from a delivering.
Yeah, and it reminds me of something my business partner, Matt, always says. He talks about a boss he used to have. He'd say that this boss would always give him the Friday night ambush. So, if there was something that needed to be brought up, it wouldn't be brought up all week, and just as he was back to the door on a Friday, boom, hand grenade in the room, which obviously flies in the face of everything you just said. And I can really see on the opposite side of that spectrum, in a really well-functioning business, where people understand these concepts, there could be a really great conversation where you, as the boss or the person that's going to lead the conversation, you, out of courtesy, say, I need to have a conversation with you, and it's about this. And then the person knows themselves well enough, according to the principles you were just talking about, to say, okay, that sounds like a conversation that would work better for me if we can get outside and go for a walk. Yeah. Which is such a grown up and respectful way of setting things up, isn't it?
Yeah, and we can try and find the utopia of communication, but I think it's something that you can develop over time. And I think even just almost laying the ground rules of this is how we work in this practice. We are if things are going wrong, we're going to highlight it straight away. I had a client who used to write things in a black book when she started working with me. I was horrified. She said, I've really got to get rid of this person. And then she took this black book out and showed me all the things that this person had done wrong. And I was, that's on like the complete other extreme. And it was like, that was hard work. But, I think if you right from the outset talk about, we're going to have one-to-ones. If there's anything that comes up, this is how we address these situations. And, I know some cultures that you go into are maybe, dictatorial, and everybody else is a little bit frightened of the boss, or there's just kind of that ruinous empathy when no conversations ever take place. And we kind of want to bring that all over to this radical candid place where everybody cares personally and everybody has permission to challenge directly.
Yeah, both ways. I, as we were talking about that, I'm reminded it only a few months ago, actually, I sent a group WhatsApp out to my team because something I'd realised. I said, look, guys, when you need to bring something up with me and you send me a WhatsApp that says, Jo, can I have a word? I said, please just write a couple of lines, because I said, mostly it's nothing I need to worry about. Yeah. But if it is, tell me what it is. But please just do me the courtesy of not just writing that line, because I've got a limbic system too.
Absolutely. And I think that's where we were talking earlier about the kind of the yes, we've got the headline values of the business and direction of the business, but actually we've also got people that have got their own needs, and generally your team are spending a large majority of their time in their 24 hours is spent in your business. So let's see what they need from us to make that a really enjoyable environment.
So you've thrown so many great books and concepts. I've been scribbling them down. I'm going to try and verbally rattle them off, but let's make sure we write them in the notes for this session as well. So we started off talking about the book Surrounded by Idiots, and I didn't write down the author of that one.
Thomas Erickson.
And we talked about Kim Scott's work on radical candour.
Yep.
And you've just talked about David Rock's book, or is it just a concept? The scarf?
Yeah, so his concept. He's written a few books, but he's written a book called Quiet Leadership. I don't think the scarf model's in there though. But there's a whole paper. If you just Google David Rock scarf, there is quite a nice big paper on that. So it's more, so he talks about it for in the workplace. So it's not clinic specific, but I think, it's people specific.
Yeah, absolutely. There's some brilliant things there that I'm definitely going to go and look up, the ones I know less about as well. And just to let people know, Celia and I are going to put together on the back of the webinar that I did for Celia's community and this podcast that she's kindly done for me. We're going to put together a longer workshop, probably about a 3-hour workshop, where we go into these ideas around conflict in more detail, and we want it to be very interactive, don't we, Celia?
Yeah.
People can bring their own particular circumstances, particular concerns, particular skills that they've developed, and make it really interactive. We haven't set a date for this. Well, actually, by the time this podcast goes out, we would have set a date for this, and we hope we'll put it in the notes with this. So if the concepts that Celia and I have talked about today have sort of lit a spark for you, and it's something that you feel would be beneficial either for yourself personally or within your business, or both, to look at a little bit more deeply, then look out for the details of the workshop. Celia, I'm going to ask you one personal question at the end. And I'm not going to ask you, can you give me 3 top tips? Because I hate being asked that question. So I can't bring them all together in one go. Given us both top tips. On a scale of 0 to 10, as a, what are you, yellow, red? Red, yellow?
Yeah, yellow, red, yes.
How much do you like conflict?
For my sins. How much do I like doing it? Oh, I'm dreadful. Probably. Well, how much I like dealing with it? 0.
Yeah.
How often do I put my big old panties on? Probably I'm still learning. Probably 4 or 5. I'm still,
That's so reassuring to me and everybody listening.
But yeah, how much do I work on being able to not call it conflict? A lot.
Yeah, no, that is such a helpful answer. I think if you'd said 9, yeah, that would have been more difficult to hear.
No, completely human being.
Absolutely. With all the quirks. Well, thank you so much for being my guest today, and for bringing all your knowledge, all those tips, all those references. It's been really, really helpful. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having me.
Pleasure. Take care, Celia. Hello again. I hope you enjoyed that conversation and that session with Celia Champion. I didn't ask Celia at the end for contact details, but if you look up Painless Practice with her name, then you will certainly find all the information you need and any contact details you need. You heard us make reference at the end of the session to a 3-hour workshop we're going to be conducting to allow you to delve deeper into some of these concepts and to come up with real life examples so you can put some of these principles into practice and work out how you and your businesses might be able to develop strategies and a culture that is able to handle and live with and survive conflict. So we'll put the details on how to sign up to that workshop along with this episode. And we would love lots of you to join us so that we can develop these ideas further and get you a little more comfortable with conflict. If you are someone trying to take care of yourself and others and all sorts of scenarios around you all day, every day, and in relation to this episode, if you're someone that is having to manage sometimes and all the feelings around that, remember you're human, give yourself a break, and remember that you matter.
To mehab, to youhab? Don't get the Chuckle Brothers in to help with your well-being. Go to Joe Turner and invest in your health for a change. Put your oxygen mask on first with coaching, resources and supportive community at mehab.co.uk.